Town of Los Gatos Council of May 3rd. And if we could start off with a roll call, please.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syak.
Here.
Councilmember Hudas.
Here.
Councilmember Badami.
Here.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Remy.
Here. Thank you. Looks like everybody's here and ready to go, bushy-eyed and bushy-tailed, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, whatever it is. So if we could start, roll our meeting decorum video, please.
The public is welcome to participate at town council meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meetings is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. At each meeting, the following expectations of civil conduct shall apply. 1. For the benefit of the entire community, the town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the council agenda. 2. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at council meetings. 3. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at town council meetings. 4. All public comments at the town council meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. 5. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the mayor may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the council exiting the chamber. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the council would return to the chamber and the mayor would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a council meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code Section 403. These expectations of conduct also apply to meetings of all town boards, committees, and commissions.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have 3 presentations. If I could ask Robert Gray to turn on his video. And so our first presentation is we have a proclamation, but I won't read it. It's for Building Safety Month, and Robert Gray is representing our building department. So thank you to Mr. Gray. There's our proclamation. So thank you to Mr. Gray and all the members of our building department that help to make sure that our buildings are safe when construction occurs. So thank you for all your hard work. Okay, next up, if I could ask Tim Borden to turn his camera on. Looks like he went away. Turned it on and killed it. Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go.
All right, thank you. So next up, we have a proclamation for National Public Works Week. And Mr. Borden, Director Borden is representing all of our public parks and public works department. So again, we want to thank you and all of your department for all the hard work you do, keeping our parks looking good and our streets and potholes filled and the streets clean and everything, and all of the service that you do to our town. So thank everybody in the department for the town council. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
All right, next up, if I could have members from the town clerk's office turn on their cameras, Ms. Nis, and if we have, yep, and Ms. Long. So the next item is a proclamation for Municipal Clerks Week. So thank you, Ms. Nis and Long, for all the work that you do in our clerk's office, and all the service you do for the town and keeping the town council and everybody in good care. So thank you again. So those were our three presentations for today. Again, thank you to all of the members of staff that provide such great service to the people of Los Gatos and to our council members. Next up, we have council and manager matters. If I could start with Council Member Sayak.
Thank you. Since our last meeting, two items to share and an upcoming announcement. So Vice Mayor Risto and I participated on the Housing Element Advisory Board. They had a meeting and they have another one this Thursday. So for those that are interested in housing, please attend. The county had their hate prevention and inclusion task force, of which I'm a member, and that was just looking at a series of recommendations based on the research that they had done, finalizing those list of priorities, and then ultimately the goal is to bring that back to the county and all municipalities, including Los Gatos. And this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and because of that, the Peninsula Division will be hosting some staff from Governor Newsom's office on March 18, where we will talk about the CARES Court and what that means for cities like ours. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of good hard work. Council Member Badami.
Thank you. On April 21st, I attended the Housing Element Advisory Board meeting regarding site selection for future housing. On April 25th, I attended the Finance Commission meeting as an observer. On April 25th and again on April 27th, I attended the Planning Commission meetings regarding the draft 2040 general plan. On May 2nd, I attended a special meeting of the Finance Commission as an observer. And last night, I attended the Planning Commission meeting regarding the draft 2040 general plan. And I can report that they completed their deliberations in forwarding a recommendation to Town Council.
All right, thank you. Good work. Let's go with Council Member Hudes next.
Good evening. Let's see. On the 20th, I attended a terrific reception for our senior group. This was open to the whole senior community, sponsored by the Senior Services Committee with a lot of help from the Chamber of Commerce. And at that point, we were concluding our work on the community survey, the workshops, and the benchmarking. On the 21st, I participated in another meeting of the work plan subcommittee of the Senior Services Committee. And then the following week on the 25th, I participated in the Finance Commission special meeting on the budget. And that was, I believe, our first meeting. And then we held another meeting on the budget just last night. And I think we have one more to go on the budget before the Finance Commission will make a recommendation to the Town Council. So that's it.
Thank you. Lots of good work. Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. In addition to a variety of commission meetings and meetings with residents, I think all the council members were at the Senior Services reception, the ARC Bar. I do have to say, I think Councilmember Sayak came in on a fake ID though. But anyway, it was really a great event and clearly evidence that our community is really looking forward to opportunities to get together and socialize and see each other. And, it was a great time to get information and to have people get together in a comfortable and wonderful environment. In terms of people getting together, I was able to volunteer at the wine walk last weekend, and that event sold out. There were 1,200 people that came to Los Gatos to walk through downtown. And I had a few people comment that, why was it only 3 hours long? And I said, well, the wine walk is 3 hours, but town is open till 11 or 12. So it was really great. I would have to say that as I was checking people in, about a third of the people were downtown, Los Gatos residents that I recognized or that lived in town. Maybe a third were people that used to live in Los Gatos and came back. And then there were a huge number of people that have never been to Los Gatos before and were just stunned at how beautiful it is. And they just were having a great time. And so kudos to the chamber for putting it on. Kudos to all of the town staff who worked on all of the logistics, and to the merchants, and to the wineries. It was a very successful event and just kind of a beautiful way to showcase our town. I also spent the next day at Spring into Green, which I think our first one was in 2016, and we missed 2 because of the pandemic. And it was a great way to highlight all of the environmental work and, celebrating Earth Day and looking at all the different ways the town and different groups come together to support sustainability. Let's see. And then I'll let the mayor report on this, but he and I were at the terraces this past week, addressing members of the terraces and answering their questions, which was very informative, very engaged community, and really brought up some opportunities and needs to connect with the larger community. And last Thursday, I attended the reading of the poetry contest. So our poet laureate, Jen, I know I'm going to get her last name wrong, I always do, Saraganian, when she was appointed poet laureate and she was talking about events she wanted to do last year, one was to have a poetry contest. And Thursday night at the library, the top 3 winners in each of the categories, youth, teen, and adult, read their poetry or performed it. Someone had written a fun song about Highway 17, the way between. And so that was just a really great opportunity to see the talent in our community. She received almost 100 submissions. And so, I don't know if those poems will be published anywhere or not, but it was really a wonderful evening. And finally, on Friday, because the mayor was busy, I got to fill in. I was at Mulberry School with several members of Parks and Public Works for Arbor Day, where a pre-K and kindergarten class came out to plant a tree on Arbor Day. And I have to say, these children, which were probably age 4 to 6, know so much about trees, and they were so excited to plant their tree. And it was just enthusiastic. They love their tree. And it turns out we planted a Western redbud, and the leaves are shaped kind of like hearts. And that did not go unnoticed by the students. So anyway, I really appreciate the work of Parks and Public Works and that opportunity to share kind of planning for the future. You plant a tree for the next generation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Lots of good work. And again, thank you for filling in for me for the Arbor Day. We did do a ceremonial tree with some of the same students at our Spring into Green that you mentioned. I also attended the 2 budget meetings for the Finance Commission that were mentioned, and the senior reception that was mentioned. On 4/9, I also attended our Air District BACMed board meeting, and 4/22, I attended the VTA board meeting. And I don't recall if Councilmember Sayak mentioned it, but on 4/22, the 2 of us attended what was called Uplift Family Services, now is Pacific Clinics. We attended their lunch. And on 4/23, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy celebrated their 5-year of delivering power to our community. And in those 5 years, we've saved $77 million compared to what PG&E would have charged. And we have avoided 575 million pounds of greenhouse gases compared to what PG&E would have bought and put on the power lines. So big accomplishment there, I would say. Let's see, should we mention the Spring into Green? And yes, the Vice Mayor and I spoke at the terraces. We did a tag team alternating. I would do one. They had submitted questions ahead of time, so I answered one, and then the Vice Mayor would answer one, and then I would answer one. And it was amazing. They were, even once we actually did a pretty thorough job, they then kept asking us more questions. I think we were there for at least an hour and a half. So they were very engaged, and there must have been 30 or 40 people there, I think. And the town manager came to back us up in case there was any question we couldn't answer. So thank you, town manager, for having our back on that one. But I think anything I didn't know, Maria already knew. So we were pretty much okay. Let's see, 427, the West Valley mayors and managers met at a monthly meeting. Joe Smitting was our guest and talked about things that he was doing. And then on 428, I attended the Police Foundation, had an introduction of our new police chief. And that's it for me. I will go to Manager Matters.
Thank you so much. We are continuing to recruit for youth commissioners. The application deadline is Friday, May 6th, so please get your applications in. We are also recruiting for our adult commissions. Applications are due on May 27th. In addition to the recognition that the mayor did of our town staff, I also want to recognize May as a very special month. In addition to Mental Health Month and the various disciplines the mayor mentioned, we also have Historic Preservation Month, as well as Affordable Housing Month. So that would be recognition for the hard work of our Community Development Department in those two areas. And then National Police Week is also here in the month of May. So we really want to recognize our wonderful police staff, both sworn and non-sworn. So please join me in thanking all the staff in these different departments. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds good. All right, let's move on. Next is our consent agenda. These are items that will be voted on by a single vote of council. Usually they're items that don't need any discussion. And on tonight's consent, we have items 1 through 15. Would any member of council wish to pull an item for further discussion? Councilmember Hudes.
Yes, please. I have a question on item 5 that maybe can be answered quickly, and then I'd like to pull number 15 on the police dispatch situation. On item 5, which is the ordinance, the social host ordinance, my question is when will that ordinance go into effect?
If staff has an answer to that, I guess it's for Mr. Schultz. So he's looking it up clearly.
I guess related to that, I wonder if we have accomplished community outreach jointly with the schools. I think we spoke about the school district as well as the private schools with an attempt to communicate with parents or adults in collaboration with the schools, and wanted to make sure that we were doing the outreach in conjunction with the timing of the ordinance going into effect. So we're not, in a situation where we're playing gotcha and issuing citations without having done outreach, or probably more importantly, not taking advantage of the opportunity to engage the community on this really important topic and the progress that we're trying to make in dealing with this. So I wanted to probe a little bit on the coordination of outreach and the effective date of the ordinance.
The effective date of the ordinance will be 30 days from the adoption of the ordinance, so 30 days from this evening. If I was still your town attorney, I would tell you, as I've told before, that we don't use it as a stick. We educate, we inform, and I'm certain that will be done. I'm sure Laurel can also chime in and say that the police department will be working with the youth department to do the outreach and see that that's also done at the school. And I'll follow up with the new town attorney who can also confirm that. But we're not going to be writing citations on the 31st date. That's not what the town has ever done before, even before I got here. And I would doubt very seriously they would take that heavy hand after I'm gone.
Chief, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, Youth Commission was out and present at the Spring into Green event, and they did have some conversations with the local community regarding the recent ban related to the straws and other reusable items, in addition to this ordinance as well, and just answering some questions. And then there is also information that's provided to all of the leadership staff within the police department that this ordinance is coming for that update for information. And then future outreach will be done with the schools through coordination with the Youth Commission as they put together a fact sheet, and then also reach out to their resources within their youth base as well.
But if council does have any concerns, we have with other ordinances, we clearly gave a lag period. If you remember, for the smoking ordinance, it was 6 months. So that's something you could always implement a different adoption date than other than the 30 days.
Okay, Mr. Hudis, would you like to change anything, or are you okay with the ordinance?
I'm okay. I would probably ask the question again in 30 days about whether we've accomplished outreach. It's an opportunity more than anything to really start to engage with adults who in many cases are either unaware of the consequences. And so if it's 30 days, that's fine. I can ask the question again in 30 days, but I think it's very, very important. We said we would do it. We discussed this as a key element, so I would like to encourage us to do it. And I don't need to make a change on that one, but I would like to pull number 15 to have a little more discussion about that, please.
All right, so we have in our consent calendar consists of items 1 through 14. Any other council member wish to pull anything? Seeing none, I will go and see if a member of the public wishes to comment on items 1 through 14. See Joanne Rogers. So this is on the consent calendar, items 1 through 14.
This is not on the consent calendar. So
okay, so you probably want verbal communications. We'll get to that shortly. So
okay.
I will put you back for now. Thank you. All right, so I'll come back to council. No other public comment interested on the consent calendar. I'm looking for a motion for items 1 through 14. Councilmember Badami.
I move to approve consent items 1 through 14.
Councilmember Sayak.
I'll second.
And any further comment? Would any council member wish to comment on Vice Mayor Risto?
I just want to make a comment, and I think outreach is a good thing, but in terms of the social host ordinance, we may be levying fines or increasing punishment, but there is nothing that we're precluding in the social host ordinance that's actually legal, correct? It's not legal to host a party with underage people and provide alcohol or drugs. I just want to verify that with the town attorney. Who's on mute?
So it's never legal to provide a minor with an illegal substance, or in this case, alcohol, although legal, can't be provided to a minor. So it always is. And there are exceptions that we've now put in there. That was when we added from last time, when it's related to a religious exemption. But besides for that, I don't know of any other exceptions. So it already was. This just provides a local mechanism that we can find as opposed to doing a penal code and arresting someone for a misdemeanor.
Okay, thank you. So knowing that we are just kind of amplifying the law, I am quite comfortable with moving forward with this. Thank you.
Okay, no, I don't see any other comments from council members. I will go ahead and call the question for consent calendar items 1 through 14. Vice Mayor Risto,
Aye.
Councilmember Hudis.
Aye.
Councilmember Sayoc,
Aye.
Councilmember Badami,
Aye.
and the mayor votes aye. So consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 14 passes unanimously. As our tradition, we will hear 15 at the end of our agenda after 16. So next I will go to verbal communications, and this is Joanne Rogers' opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening to me once again. As our youth commission implements these stricter rules on vaping and smoking and alcohol, what are you, our adult council members, doing? You're thinking of allowing storefront marijuana sales in our town. As many of us have met with most of the council members, it seems that allowing marijuana dispensaries is only about the money. Is that it? It can't be about the convenience because stores are 15 minutes away. Many of your constituents do not want cannabis sales as our revenue source in Los Gatos. We've not seen any incremental cost analysis such as police services, related crimes, traffic, social and community cost, and the image messaging that will have a long-term impact. This is not a benign decision that you're making on this. There will be consequences. Those of us who are opposed to allowing storefront recreational marijuana sales, we have not been convinced that this is a good idea for our town. If it is about anything other than revenue, convince your constituents that marijuana dispensaries are a good thing and not just about the money. Look at it this way. If we could be a town that keeps our existing ordinance intact and says no to promoting marijuana sales in our town's boundary, it's okay. Let's be adults in the room and watch out for our kids. I want to thank all of you for everything that you do. You're busy people and you're doing a great job for our town. And I really appreciate the time that you've spent with all of us on this subject and all the other things that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Are there any questions for Ms. Rogers? I don't see any hands from council, so thank you. Next up, Jeffrey Suzuki.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to spend my comment on discussing a potential land acknowledgement that the Los Gatos Town Council could have in the future. The many organizations, local governments, and state governments around the world have land acknowledgements right now towards their indigenous population. And in my view, a land acknowledgement is a proper first step in establishing potential future correspondence and collaboration with the indigenous people of this land. With recent JEDI efforts by the town council and the Listen, Learn, Change, Grow campaign, we believe that this land acknowledgement will provide a lot of educational value for our community. There are many already in the community who would like to have a land acknowledgement, specifically to the Ohlone people, of which relatively few people are aware of. But even fewer people are aware that there are actually not 8 language groups that exist within this broad classification of the Ohlone people. Los Gatos falls within the territory of one of these people, the Tamian Nation. The Tamian Nation does not consider themselves Ohlone, and last month we had a meeting with their chairwoman to discuss how we could best support their efforts. If we truly care about educating the public on the people of Los Gatos and want to truly support our Indigenous population, this represents a good educational opportunity for our residents and a good first step. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask our town manager, Ms. Probetti. I believe we've planned an agenda item on this one. Is that correct? Could you let Mr. Suzuki know which day that's planned for?
Yes, we're looking at June 7th for council discussion of it.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any hands. I will thank Mr. Suzuki, put him back in our attendees. Thank you. I don't see any other hands for verbal communication, so I will close the open verbal communication for items not on the agenda and move us to agenda item number 16, which is the results of our community survey, and turn it over to Mr. Arn Andrews for a staff report.
Good. Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. So the item before you is really more informational in that we conducted an RFP to get a firm to go ahead and do a community survey for our town. The firm we hired is ETC, and ETC has provided us with the results of that survey, which is part of your packet this evening. Included in that packet is quite a bit of information. And so part of what we'd like to do tonight is really just kind of walk through the information and how the information kind of intersects with each other so that council and our community can start to sift through the information and start to make, some conclusions and determinations. Staff this evening isn't really extrapolating and making decisions to, provide council with options based on the data. This evening is really more about orienting ourselves and getting comfortable with the document, and then that way council and the community can start to think what it might mean from a policy perspective, and also for the town organization from a management perspective. And so if it's okay, Mayor, I've got a PowerPoint that I'd like to walk through.
That sounds good. And some of us have seen this at the Finance Commission, but it's got a lot of detail, so it's good to see it again.
Great, thank you. So the first thing I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the survey structure, because there are several elements that are great information independently, and then there's also elements that as you start to see how they interact with each other, you can start to discern more information out of the data. So the whole intent of the survey is to provide our council with information about where you might want to target resources towards the services that are of the highest importance to residents. But then with ETC, conversely, it also gives us a view of where we could target resources towards services that residents aren't necessarily satisfied with how we're doing currently. And so a lot of this survey will talk about what we're doing well, but then we'll also talk about where we have opportunities for improvement based on the results from the survey. Another element of ETC is if we start to do this as an organization, for instance, let's say every 2 years, we can start to benchmark ourselves and be held accountable and start a time series of the data so we can see if we decided that there was an area where we wanted to have significant policy consideration, how did we do 2 years from now, or how did we do 4 years from now? And so it's a tool that continue to grow with us if we opt to do that. One of the first levels of the analysis as you start to flip through the report is the importance of satisfaction with major town services. So they start at a very high level. And then you'll notice that as they start to move through the survey, they then start bringing it down to a more granular level. So you'll notice the second level of analysis is really specific to our service lines. And one of the ways this will be beneficial, as I mentioned, will be at that organizational level as our directors and our managers start to also sift through the document so that they can glean insight into how they're doing. And then ETC has another unique element, which is what they refer to as the important satisfaction rating. And what they do is they take the idea that agencies will maximize overall resident satisfaction by emphasizing improvements in areas where there's a level of satisfaction that's relatively low. And at the same time, it has a very high perceived importance. And so we'll see what folks think is important. And then we'll see if they're satisfied with the current service. And if those two intersect, that's typically going to be an area where ETC is going to make recommendations for us to focus on in the future. So at a very high level, the statistical significance of this survey ended up being quite high. We originally were targeting a survey that if we got 400 responses, that would give us a plus or minus confidence of about 5%, which is typical when you see polling and elections in other areas. We ended up with 650 completed surveys. And so we actually have a plus or minus 3.8%, and that's at the confidence level of 95%. You can see geographically, good representation. ETC made sure that we would not only get good geographic representation, but we'd also get good demographic representation. Oftentimes surveys won't necessarily get as robust as a response, and so they then start trying to normalize for it. In this instance, we got good representation both geographically and demographically. So let me start off with the good news. The good news is at a very high level, you can see that residents have rated the town either excellent or a good place to live, 97.2%. So overall, we have a community that enjoys their quality of life here. But that said, the intent of this survey is to find the areas where we can do better. And so we're starting at a good place, but as we start to drill down, you'll notice that while we have a very high satisfaction level overall, the community does have some areas they'd like us to think about. One of the other elements that ETC has, which was compelling for us, is they do have the ability to benchmark us versus not only other California agencies, but national agencies. And then you'll see on here, they can also benchmark us against communities of similar size. You will see, as a place to live, we were significantly higher than the rest of their comparative benchmark agencies. So, not only do we have a community that is generally pleased with where they live, but compared to other communities similar to us, we're doing quite well. So I mentioned one of the first things they wanted to do is kind of look at the very high level of just what services are the most important to residents. And you can see what they do is they aggregate the two top scores for each one. And so overall quality of town police services, 55.4%. Highly important to the community. Overall maintenance of town streets, sidewalks, infrastructure, 52%. High importance, town planning, buildings and development, important. And one of the reasons I point out this slide is because you'll start to see how the different data will either show kind of how they work together or show where it could be differences. So for instance here, major town services that are most important to residents. Overall quality of town library services, 6%. So intuitively, you might think, wow, that means we're not doing well in library. Well, it actually doesn't. It just means in the level of importance, police services and streets are more important because you'll see when you look at the satisfaction survey, library services was one of the highest in satisfaction. So here's an area where folks are already highly satisfied, and so they don't view it as a level of importance. And so as you move through the document and as you move through the data, kind of look at those compare and contrast situations, because a couple of them will start to jump out at you, and we're going to move through one of them in a second. So here's that IS analysis ratings we talked about. And so once again, what they're looking at is areas of perceived importance, but also areas of perceived dissatisfaction. So as you look through here, you can see maintenance of town streets is the number one here. It actually has a rating of 1.94, which as we move through, you'll see, oh, the others had a higher rating. Doesn't that mean it's not as important? What this means is they view it as important, but they actually view it as we're doing a fairly good job already. And so they want us to continue doing the good work because they view it as highly important. Same thing with town planning, building and development services. And then once again, overall quality of town police services. So here, we just had this slide before. It said, well, I thought overall quality of town services was the number one. And now you're saying it's the number three. And that's where this intersection comes of, they already think we're doing a really good job, but it's still highly important to them. And that's why this dropped to a third ranking here. It's not because somehow it became less important. It just starts to show how those two variables interplay with each other. So what I thought we would do is just take a single business line of the town and then walk through all the different ways the data is talked about for that business line. And so here we are, public safety perceptions that are most important to residents. So now we're strictly talking about our police department. And this is the sum of respondents' top 3 choices. And so you can see, number 1, town's overall efforts to prevent crime. In terms of the business that our police department conducts, this is one of the number 1 things for the community. Effectiveness of local police protection. Number 2, and you can see as you go down the list, how it starts to drop. And I don't want to say in importance, because once again, professionalism of police officers. Because it's 12, that's not saying they don't think that's important. They're just thinking we probably already have a very professional staff, and you'll see that in the later data. These other elements regarding crime and protection are just more important. So once again, the benchmarking comes in handy. You can see that not only does our community think that police services are very important, but you can see that we're actually faring much better in most categories than our comparator groups for benchmarking. And now you start to see an interesting one. So when you look at these bar graphs, obviously the top bar being ahead of the other ones is good, and you can quickly orient yourself to where you see a bar that's below the benchmark. Visibility of police personnel in neighborhoods, that's an interesting one. There's a perceived benchmark here that our community is not feeling that we're doing as well as some of our benchmarking communities. Visibility is boots on the ground, it's officers. And so it's either how you configure officer doing their zones and their routes, or it's more officers. And so you start to see as you move into the different lower granular level where you can start to discern things from all these different data sets. Once again, now let's just look at police services as it relates to these IS satisfaction analysis ratings. Town's overall efforts to prevent crime, number 1 here too. So what this does is it confirms not only do they think it's highly important, but they continue to think that it's highly important and we can do better. And then you'll start to see the priority levels. They break them down into 3 groups, very high, high, medium priority. Once again, professionalism of police officers is at the bottom. It's not at the bottom because it's not important. It's at the bottom because it has a perceived importance and they already think we're doing well there. So you can kind of look at these as if at the top, those are the areas where they think it's highly important and we can do better. And the ones at the bottom are where they still think it's important, but they already think we're doing very well. One of the interesting things about ETC is they also provide GIS mapping. So not only do we get to see the survey results at the aggregate level, but now we get a sense of, are there areas of our community that geographically feel they're having a different experience than other parts of our community. So once again, level of satisfaction with overall quality of town police services. You can see this confirms the majority of the town is very satisfied or satisfied with police services. But the object of this survey isn't to just confirm that we think we're doing well, it's to find where we can do better. So now we see a GIS map, which is the level of satisfaction with the town's overall efforts to prevent crime. You'll recall that this was one of the number 1s, just overall, that was cared about in the community. When we looked at the IS analysis charts, this rose to the top as number 1, where they think we can do better. And then with the GIS map, it's interesting because now we start to see certain neighborhoods that had more of an impression that, you know, neutral, no one dissatisfied, which is nice to see. But you start to see how different parts of our community might feel they're having a different experience. To kind of highlight that point, here's the GIS map associated with the satisfaction with the visibility of police personnel in neighborhoods. We just mentioned visibility was highly important, and it's the one area in benchmarking where we weren't doing as well as our comparative groups. Now you start to see a larger majority of the community is now in that neutral bucket, as opposed to in the satisfied or very satisfied. There is no very satisfied here. We have portions of our community that are satisfied, but we have large portions of our community that are neutral, which infers they think we can do better. Another area of the survey, which is also interesting because a lot of these questions are open-ended. And so we asked folks, go ahead and provide comments on areas, that you don't think have been addressed. And so each business line has a section just like this. When you move to safety and then safety under police related, there were 8 comments. And so the survey, if you start to sift through the comments, it actually gives you a little more clarity about what the survey results may or may not mean. It's a qualitative assessment, but it does start to give you a better impression of what folks were thinking. So the 8 mentions, they're all right here. Comply with police, support them. Educating police in appropriate behavior with people of differing backgrounds and opinions. Hire additional police. Improve the police department. They are non-existent in my neighborhood. The police are always speeding around in their expensive trucks. They need to get out of their cars and interact with the community. Stop buying them expensive trucks, so on and so forth. Too much crime. We need to invest in our police department to ensure we are protected within the community. They are doing a good job and need more support to continue to make our streets safe. Los Gatos needs to get back its police department. And finally, dispatchers for police department. And so collectively, as we start to move through all the different elements of the survey, you can see that you can really start to dig down and drill down and start to discern things. I just used the police department as an example. Every business line of the town has a similar set of data, whether it's parks and public works, whether it's the broader category of community vitality and things of that nature, but all of them you'll be able to walk through and say, well, first of all, what's most important to folks? Second of all, how are we doing relative to some of our other communities? At the department level, what do folks think is the most important thing? Where are we doing good in terms of high satisfaction, high perceived importance? Where can we improve? High degree of importance, low degree of satisfaction, and then so on and so forth. So with that, Mayor and Council, at the Finance Commission, we actually ended up doing a pretty good amount of Q&A. I'm happy to do that also. You'll have to bear with me because I'll end up needing to flip through the paper document as opposed to the PowerPoint. But at this stage, as I mentioned, town is still sifting through this information also. We're trying to decide, if we're gonna come up with anything in terms of policy recommendations to council. The council, should also be sifting through this information, trying to decide if there's anything you want to glean from it from a policy perspective. Our community, I'm sure, is going to continue to be interested in it so they can see what the rest of the community is thinking, and our town managers will continue to look at it to see if there's areas in their departments with low-hanging fruit and things we can approach at the departmental level.
Thank you, Arn. Mayor and Council, I just also want to add that we did issue a desk item this evening, or actually this afternoon, that corrected a couple of errors that were in the report. Some of the demographic information was incorrectly published with the first time around. So you have that desk item, and I do want to just reiterate that we use this as a tool to help us with our continuous improvement efforts and cost efficiency work within each department. And we're hopeful that we will be able to run a similar survey every 2 years. So not only will we be benchmarking against our colleagues nationally and locally, but also have some time series data for our own town. Thank you.
Questions, Councilmember Badami?
Thank you. What was the cost to conduct this survey, and can we expect a similar cost every 2 years?
Off the top of my head, and I reserve the right to go back and correct myself, I believe it was around 25,000. And if we do want to continue to use the data from ETC to kind of benchmark ourselves and have accountability in certain areas where we decide to, pursue a policy objective, we would recommend 2 years from now utilizing the same survey company. And there's other companies out there. It's a pretty competitive field, so I think the rates stay pretty competitive. We ended up, as you can see from the staff report, with 8 responses, and they were all fairly similar in terms of cost.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hudis?
Thank you. I guess what I wanted to understand is whether we expect this to be actionable. For instance, there were two of the highest dissatisfaction importance items that we haven't talked about. One is the management of growth, and the second was flow of traffic. And so maybe if we could just spend a minute to talk about how those, which, you know, looked like they were head and shoulders above all the others at 0.43 and 0.47 as compared to, you know, the next group that seemed to be in the 0.2 area. How would we turn that into something actionable, as an example?
And thank you for the question. And it sounded like you were quoting IS analysis numbers. And so in speaking with ETC, we wanted to understand better ourselves, you know, if something is a 0.46 and something is a 0.2, does that mean folks have double the importance of the other ones? And they said, not necessarily. They said, what the higher numbers do indicate is, once again, you have a low level of satisfaction and a very high degree of importance. And so I'll put up traffic right now because you used that as one example, and then I'll put up the planning for growth as another one. And so flow of traffic on town streets, as you mentioned, first in the initial level of satisfaction, you can see this was an area where 40% were either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, you know, relative to maintenance of street and signals. And so once again, going back to the kind of executive summary, maintenance of streets and signals has a high degree of importance, but it also has a high degree of satisfaction, but it's something the community expects us to continue doing. So when you start to move down to traffic on town streets, once again, there's clearly a lot of discontent in this topic. And so let's try and drill down a little more and see if we can figure out a little more about it. Sorry for sifting through these like this. Oh, actually, while we're here, let's go ahead and do this one also, because you mentioned this one also. So this is the grouping under economic opportunities. You can see it's everything from healthy life choices to food and healthcare to quality workforce. And then all of a sudden you start to see the big pink and red numbers the second we start talking about housing. So access to quality housing you can afford, 29% dissatisfied and very dissatisfied. You start to see support for entrepreneurs, which is an interesting one, 29%, efforts to attract business, 27%, and then affordable housing units, and then managing growth, 24 and 17 and 26 and 18. So once again, you start to see a big disparity between the top healthy food versus here, where they think there's lots of room for improvement. And then you start to look at the data this way. How well the town is managing growth starts to rise to the top as most important. You can see the housing, even there's a lot of discontent and dissatisfaction there. Housing starts to move down the list, which is interesting because it's like they're dissatisfied, but they rate some of these other items as more important. So you start to see managing growth, very important issue.
So Arn, on that one, you talked about it's important, but is it telling us how we did, or is it just saying it's important?
So that's the interesting. On that one, it's just saying important, and you start to see differences on that one versus where they were talking about dissatisfaction, like level of satisfaction. And so it's this blending of importance with the level of satisfaction that starts to, you know, eke out a little more information. So once again here, community investment, areas most important to residents by top. And so we start to see this question is getting at, where would you put more money? You know, what would you be interested in seeing more of? So reduce congestion, increase traffic flow, maintaining streets again, and then you still start to see the increasing neighborhood police patrols. So, you know, we continue to see themes that are around public safety and themes that are around roads and streets. Bear with me, I'm going to go through some of these slides quickly. And what I'm trying to do is to get to the IS numbers that the council member was referencing.
I found it on page 50.
Page 50. Thank you for that, council member. That'll spare folks' eyes a little.
Yeah, 50 and 49, or 48 and 50.
Great. And here's why we're sifting through. Here's another good example. Satisfaction versus benchmarks. Once again, you see maintenance of streets. We're actually doing better to comparative communities. Flow of traffic on town streets at the bottom. Look at that. 32.2% versus our benchmarks. So not only does our community not think we're doing as well as we should, compared to our benchmarks, we're also not doing as well compared to our benchmarks.
So as an example on the traffic, would we maybe then try to engage our Complete Streets and Transportation Commission on that issue? You know, they've spent a lot of time on some other issues that are of much lower IS rating. Is that a resource, for instance? Is that how we could turn this information into action?
That's one approach, certainly. I would say really our strategic priorities are probably the best way to get alignment between the council's priorities and the work of the commissions. And as council knows, we've been working on traffic flow for about the last 6 or 7 years in different forms. We've invested quite a bit on beach traffic, trying a number of different techniques. This is not a solvable problem, which I know is very frustrating to our residents, but we've also invested in improvements around traffic flow around our schools. We did that traffic study, which has been leading to a lot of the pedestrian and bicycle improvements. So that way our students have a different way of getting to our schools. Traffic flow is going to continue to be a challenge. And I would say as we think forward to our January strategic priorities, and as the council considers its budget investments for next fiscal year and into the capital program for the next 5, that this data could be useful in that regard. I think just giving a general directive of fixed traffic flow is probably too general, just given our experience with this particular issue and how sticky it really is. And I apologize, Mr. Andrews, for jumping in there over you.
No, not at all, town manager. I was going to say there's probably a level of dissatisfaction here because we have been working on the issue for several years without a successful conclusion. And so there, you know, we tried the roundabout, we tried the one-way street pilot, which actually ended up bringing us our parklet initiative, but the one-way street was deemed, you know, not adequate because of some of the overflow traffic. When we tried doing things on a trial basis, like Caltrans allowing us to close the southern end of 17 at the south end of town, all the traffic then just spilled over into the Blossom Hill area and things of that nature. So we've worked with some of the, you know, ways and the aggregators, and we've had minimal success with that, but it's not for trying. And so probably not surprising that there's a high level of frustration here because it's gone on for years. And from a policy perspective, we've been unable to come up with a simple solution.
Understood, but I think that, you know, there is value in looking at the data and the way the residents perceive how the town is doing. So I think if we are going to do a survey, we need to pay attention to the results and develop actions for those items. Otherwise, this is just window dressing. And so, you know, there are 2 that I can see that were head and shoulders above the other the other ones, and that was the flow of traffic at 0.438 and the managing growth at 0.47. And so, again, it's a little hard to understand what does managing growth mean. People interpret that as we're not managing it to have enough growth, or what does that really mean? But to do a survey, I think if we are going to continue, we need to show that we are interested in addressing those items. And I think the IS is a hint about where to get started. And, on the other hand, if one of these does prioritize, we need to take that into consideration when we're making various decisions in the town. Otherwise, why do a survey?
And I would agree with you. I will just reiterate, in our conversations with ETC, the IS is one aspect of the survey, and a high number doesn't negate the importance of other items, because when you look at the overall survey, what is deemed to be the most important, it comes back to public safety, streets and roads, and things of that nature. But let's go ahead and dig in a little, because I think you make a very good point. What does it mean to manage town growth? And so this is where, as our council and as our community, because to your point, you can see clearly that's the highest IS rating in this group, and for most of the survey at 0.47. And so this is where we start to dig in to the tabular data. And within the tabular data is when you start to get the verbal responses where we allow narrative. And so let me just get to the growth ones, because there were responses there in narrative form. And so you can see for economic development, there were 33 mentions. Growth had 11 of those. And so you can see under those 11 mentions, attracting new companies by concentrating office facilities, enhancing convenience and accessibility, beautifying, incorporating, attracting businesses to other parts of Los Gatos, the Boulevard, Downing Center, Walgreens Center, create, support growing of Los Gatos local business, such as bike manufacturer, internet service, local child care, environmental improvement company, incentives for new business, making sure businesses impacted from the pandemic are able to actually stay in business, more attractive to business, planning and building departments to support more development, slowing the growth. The Meadows retirement home needs to be rebuilt, replaced. The Terraces has $380,000 entry fee. And then you have two more responses on this page. Would like to see investments in amenities, smart planning of parks. And then moving on to the last bullet, cycling, vehicle capacity on streets, parks and concerns. So you can see here, there's a pretty wide array of thoughts, but a lot of those here actually go to your point of more growth as opposed to less growth. So that's why we're kind of doing this presentation tonight, so that our community and our council knows, don't necessarily gravitate towards one piece. Look at all the different pieces and see how they fit together.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think, the IS score is a starting point with all this data. And then we can go from there. But I do think that we need to pay attention to it.
Okay, Councilmember Hudas, we're ready to give Councilmember Badami a chance. All right, Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. I found this survey helpful, but I agree with some of the comments of Councilmember Hudas and what we take away from it so that we can take action on it. We almost need more specificity in order to take action. For example, the traffic flow, we had 600 respondents out of a population of 30,000 in Los Gatos. So were they responding to the beach traffic? Again, that's ongoing. Or is it the log jam at Lark Avenue with North 40? Is it the reduction of traffic lanes for multimodal purposes? It'd be nice if we could kind of pinpoint it a little bit more so that we can respond. Because for me, conducting future surveys to measure benchmarks it will be a report card on our performance. So I would like to be able to be responsive to our constituents in making the town better and responding to their needs and maintaining a high satisfaction level. And that 76 dissatisfaction level with managing growth is very troubling to me.
And thank you. And so here's an area where you do start to see consistency in the comments. And so once again, as you start to piece all of this together, so traffic got 48 mentions, congestion alone got 17 of those, and you can see deal with the summer beach traffic somehow, how to reduce the impact of summer traffic. I moved here in 2000, the town has yet to address cut-through traffic. I would like to see the town do something about beach traffic. Our town cannot shut down during the summer due to beach traffic. Please close Santa Cruz 17 on-ramp. Please deal with beach traffic, redirecting weekend beach traffic off of our roads. Return Winchester to 2 traffic lanes in each direction plus a 2-way left turn. Shut down all southbound ramps on 17 from June to September. Stop traffic to Santa Cruz. Train, new road. So here, whereas before it was kind of disparate, the narrative responses, here you do start to see that consistency. And it looks like, even though this is a qualitative assessment, when folks were responding to traffic and saying it's a concern, at least from here, the majority of the concerns are beach traffic.
You're muted, Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews, for your response. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And staff, we're still learning this instrument ourselves. I mean, we have the advantage of being able to just email ETC when we want clarification. And as council starts to move through this same process, if you have questions, please feel free to forward them to us. And if we don't have the answer, we'll reach out to ETC to get kind of a better understanding of their instrument.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. I found this survey so interesting, and I haven't had a chance to watch last night's Finance Commission meeting yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that Q&A involved. But I would say that I spent a lot of time looking at the data and even more time reading the comments. So for example, when I was concerned about what are people saying about congestion, the fact that I think 14 out of 17 comments about congestion all had to do with beach traffic, what I take out of that is that can circle back to communication and the fact that Caltrans is looking at continuing that extra lane from Lark Avenue to 9 and reformatting the 917 interchange. The fact that in the last 2 years, we've had the right turn prohibition on Saturdays from the Almond Grove onto Santa Cruz Avenue. And I can attest as a resident of the Almond Grove area that absolutely has changed beach traffic on Saturdays. And if there happens to be a crash or some type of jam up on 17 on a different day, the Almond Grove jams up. So we know that works. So, I think there is some work we can do to address that. I also found it interesting going through the comments about bike lanes that were about equal, some people saying we need a lot more protected bike lanes, other people thinking that it's made driving dangerous. So I really appreciate that we have comments in here. One of the things I was curious about is, we have to be somewhat careful when an issue affects a small percentage of people and we see a large amount of satisfaction. For example, with accessibility. So if a large number of people feel like accessibility is high in town, but I would like to know what percentage of them actually use a walker, a wheelchair, a cane, push a stroller. So I think I'm wondering I don't know if we need to do that, but I know that we're doing an ADA accessibility study, but I think some of those areas, just because a majority of people think it's good, it may be that it's not on their radar screen. So that was one comment I had. And then, I guess we're not making comments, we're asking questions. So is there more data we can get from this right now in terms of, I had a list of things, including the ADA accessibility, where we could find out what percentage. Would there be the possibility to follow up, or is just something we should look at for the survey in 2 years. Like if we see things that we really can't answer from this survey, or we would like more granularity, should we start making a list of that and submit it so that we can think about that for 2 years from now?
In answer to your question, it can be both. So ETC said if the council and the community saw something as a priority and they wanted more information on it, they can do a very targeted follow-up survey on that. And then there's also the ability to just see 2 years from now, if council opts to do this again, did the numbers change? And so you do kind of have both of those available to you. I will say the senior survey might help answer some of the accessibility issues. It was very interesting that the town had these 2 surveys going on at the same time, because we already kind of have a subset of this survey with the senior survey. And so kind of looking at those also in parallel is pretty interesting. That one, I think it's about a 300-page document, and this one 150. So I apologize, but we do have a little more information regarding our older adult community that can help feed into some of the impressions here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I want to do a deeper dive on that one myself. So, but right now I feel like I really am glad that the comments were included, because it really helps explain either if there's dissatisfaction, it's not all in one direction, or it will help us understand how to either message or focus. So thank you.
And I will say thank you for mentioning communication. And so communication is an area that was identified as an opportunity for improvement. And you can see here, once again, geographically, there's a pretty good swath of our community that, you know, is satisfied, or really neutral to me is not so satisfied. It's not dissatisfied, but it's, you know, not necessarily feeling good enough to click that satisfied button when they did the survey. And so here's an area when you start to talk about subsets and trying to understand more, it's not a targeted survey to folks specifically about accessibility, but to your point, some of our issues are probably communication. And then I wanted to pull up one more. I had mentioned earlier, you know, the library system ended up being, you know, in a kind of like a lower importance category. And yet the level of satisfaction throughout the entire town is all very satisfied. And so that's why I say, as you interpret the data, you know, don't think because in one slide something is listed as a low priority versus the fact that the town is already getting huge satisfaction out of that service, which is why they don't view it as important, because they think it's in good shape. And then I thought there was one more that's a tax dollars question, but I thought there was one more that might get to some of what Councilmember Badami was asking. These are all public safety. So here we talk about traffic. Well, a subset of traffic, the community had a response to what is your satisfaction with enforcement of local traffic laws. So this could be an outcome of the fact that they're just very dissatisfied with beach traffic. And in that context, they don't think we're doing the best job of either ticketing or enforcing traffic laws. And so that's a little bit of a qualitative leap there, but you do start to see beach traffic was very important. I mean, sorry, managing traffic was very important. And then almost next up in kind of like a dissatisfaction is the concept of enforcement. You know, once again, satisfaction with maintenance of streets in your neighborhood. Most of the folks are satisfied. There's only a small percentage in certain areas where they feel we can be doing a better job. And here you go. Here's your level of satisfaction. Sorry, this is what I was looking for. With the accessibility of street sidewalks and buildings for people with disabilities. So you start to see areas where folks are neutral. This may or may not be an outcome of the fact that residents in these areas might have a higher percentage of accessibility needs, which is why we got a lower rating there. A little bit of a qualitative jump, but that could be a way to try and understand if we were going to address accessibility, what might be initial areas to target.
So let me go at this point. Let me open it up to the for public comment. Would any members of the public wish to address us on this item? Can't believe Catherine Summers doesn't want to. Oh, we get Randy. Okay, let's go with Randy Chen.
Hi, good evening, Council. Excited to see the results of this survey. We in our office all filled ours out, and although I don't think Catherine got it, but we spent much of the day discussing the results and just want to be sure we're understanding them correctly. So, Arne, your presentation was really good. And so not to put any more work on anybody, but the summary I thought was a little confusing, whereas your presentation was not confusing at all. And so I don't know if it's possible to put together for all the categories, like aggregate the answers that all relate to that subject, because that was much more understandable. So maybe the consultants can do that for traffic and economic opportunity and things that you did for the police department in your presentation. But we were confused a little bit because the three major service items for improvement were, as you said, maintenance of the streets, town planning and buildings, and the overall quality of the police department. Yet all of those had IS ratings that were, in the middle range, not the very high priority. And then the second level, public safety, streets and sidewalks, park facilities, economic opportunities, and community engagement and communication, all had IS ratings of over 0.2, which were very high priority, including managing town growth, which was over 0.4. So I think it would be helpful to aggregate them like Arne did with the police department to understand it more fully, because when you read the summary now, it looks as if those things that got very high priority are less important than the other things. And then the park facilities, which were in there, walking and biking, actually were in the lowest category in medium priority. So we were all a little bit confused. So I know that you can't answer these questions, but hopefully you can discuss it in your discussion, and then it'll make a clearer picture for the rest of us. So thank you.
Okay, Catherine Summers.
Right.
Thanks, Mayor Rennie and Randy. That was excellent. Thank you. I did want to circle back actually to something that Arne brought up about themes. And so I'm going to go back to the bullet points that Randy discussed, and I'm going to focus on the economic opportunities and the communication. So first of all, I wanted to bring up the flow of traffic. And obviously 14 of those 17 comments were about the flow of traffic in the summertime. And as Laurel mentioned last night at the Finance Commission, it is an acute problem and one that we cannot solve. So I think flowing that into communication and community engagement, if you will, we really have to change the narrative on it. There's nothing that we can do about that summer beach traffic, but we have to embrace it and somehow kind of turn it into a positive. Really, really hard to do, but I think there is possibility there. We tried it a little bit last year at the chamber and some of our outreach, and it worked to some extent. And I think this year we should all collaborate and focus on that a little more. I also think economic opportunity and managing growth. And this is a big one. This morning, I met with a woman who is representing Sandhill Properties and has the grocery store going in on the corner of Almaden and Los Gatos Boulevard. And I think, Laurel, you may have met with her later in the day. But she had reached out to me and she was very curious about how to reach out to our community. And I thought it was fascinating that she thought to reach out to me. And it made me think that we really do have to put more emphasis at the staff level in economic development, because right now we are at such a juncture. We have this general plan that is hopefully going to pass, and we have housing element that we need to pass, and there's so much opportunity here, but we really need a town staff and a chamber of commerce, for that matter, working together to figure out the opportunities that are there. The building department, maybe we need another person in the building department too, to who's going to process these applications that are going to be coming through, because there's a lot of development on the table and we need to manage it correctly. So again, I only have 3 minutes, but I just want to say that I think there are some themes here, and I think we can look at the different departments and we can really make some headway in communication and in the economic opportunities that are out there. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any hands up for questions and I don't see any other public hands up, so I'll close public comment. And Mr. Andrews wants to address something. And I also, Mr. Andrews, could you talk about what is staff's expectation on next steps? I know you're asking for direction, but what do you think the direction, what are you expecting for direction? What are you thinking you want to do with this? Particularly in this idea that you still haven't really digested it all. So what is the next steps?
Thank you, Mayor. So putting direction on a recommendation is a term of art. In the event the council did want to provide some direction this evening, it's not necessarily to imply that we feel there needs to be direction this evening, but in the event you wanted to, then from an agenda perspective, we would have the ability to entertain that. I think for all of us, it's looking at the data, and it came up in the public comments. There's different levels of data here. And so the 3 high-arching areas of importance in terms of, just high level are the 3 that were listed: the overall maintenance of town streets, town planning, buildings and development services, overall quality of town services. Once we start moving into what's kind of considered the department level, and this is where we saw, traffic, because now we're getting more granular. This is where we saw managing growth, because we're getting more granular. This is where, if there were a specific area, we could do 1 or 2 things that was mentioned earlier. If we wanted to do a more targeted follow-up survey because we think something is so significant and so glaring, we could do that. Or if it's an area where, as the department directors and the town manager start to decipher this information, we just start putting together some internal things we think we can do if we think there's some low-hanging fruit. There's a couple paths this could take, but this evening there is no overt direction we're seeking from the council unless folks came with ideas this evening. And I will pull up a few more slides because it also, once again, it's as you keep looking through this data, it helps inform the thought. So we had a conversation about traffic. When we read the narratives all seem to talk about beach traffic. When you look at the geographic data, it's kind of interesting because you would have thought that the areas south of town that are just neutral, which isn't great, but they're not very dissatisfied. You would have thought that beach traffic, those areas would have come up a little more orange and a little more red than they are in this map. When you start to see the orange appearing over by Blossom Hill, that could be a direct result of the overflow we caused a few years ago into that neighborhood. But then it's interesting because you start seeing these traffic areas north of town that aren't typically traffic areas we associate with beach traffic. So once again, another data point. What does it mean on its own? Not sure. What does it mean in the totality of all the other data we get? It might help us inform what is meant by dissatisfaction with traffic on the streets. And I'll do it real quickly, but it's been mentioned a few times tonight, just talking about planning for growth. So here's where we started seeing a whole litany of areas in that one section of economic development, where there was a pretty good amount of either neutral or dissatisfied. And so here it's interesting because you kind of see this bifurcation of the hillside residents are fairly satisfied with the quality of housing. Then we start moving into the flatlands of town and we start to get some, large concentrations of neutral. And then in very specific areas, it's dissatisfied, so maybe a survey just in that one area to find out what they mean. And the same holds true. You can see adequate and affordable housing units, which is interesting because now the hillsides are included in this. You can see that they're also neutral now when we just talk about adequate affordable housing, which is, a different kind of policy discussion than just accessibility to quality housing you can afford. And then finally, the one we discussed, level of satisfaction with how well the town is managing growth. So now you see these pretty large swaths of dissatisfied, also in the hillsides, who have been pretty satisfied with their own affordability. Now you see them dissatisfied in managing growth, and then kind of on the east end of town, and once again in the downtown core, like Almond Grove and everywhere, just neutral, which once again is not great, but it's not like the core areas of dissatisfaction throughout a large section of the town. So once again, these are areas that might merit additional follow-up surveys, or these are areas where, we might decide, we don't have enough information yet, but I think collectively there's a lot here. And ultimately, I think, the town manager and the directors will start to look at areas that we think we have the tools to chip away at, with the capacity we have and with the current construct we have in our departments. But then there might, as the town manager mentioned, during strategic priorities next year or other, forums, you might start to want to guide us in certain directions, that you might think, you have the capacity, you have the ability to do it. We've never really made it a strategic priority. Maybe we should.
And so what I get from that is our next step could be to ask staff to put together a report. As we've said, we want to address the top, the highest priority ones, and there's a couple ways that things came out top priority. And then you also talked about low-hanging fruit, meaning something to implement that could make a big difference. And then you also mentioned if in trying to figure out how to address this, if you don't understand it, then maybe we want to do another survey. But it seems to me the way to move forward is we really put it in your court to come back with a more detailed report, and then we will help prioritize or say, well, we think you missed something, kind of thing, in that report. So that seems like the next step to me, but I'll see if my fellow council members agree. Let me start with Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's a great idea. A couple things that popped into my head as I was reading the survey were that in general, services that are provided by our staff were rated very high. So even if people felt like there should be more police on the street, their interactions with the police officers were incredibly positive. And the same thing with our other areas. So I think in terms, I think that was a huge vote of confidence in our town staff. And so I think that, we know that we've got a strong staff. It looks like there's places that we might need more staff members if we're going to provide more services, which then puts us at that difficult conversation we're going to be having if we look like we're going to start having budget issues. And we know that being a service-oriented organization, service equals people. So then that's going to put more pressure on our budget. So that'll be additional things to consider. I love the fact that we have the GIS information. I mean, one of the things that I need to look further at, and if staff could look at it, is when there was like dissatisfaction with affordable housing. As I was looking at those areas that were red, I'd be curious to know if that's a higher percentage of apartments there. So it could be that, a lot of our homeowners are longtime homeowners, or it's their second or third house. When someone is renting, they're subject to the pressures of rent continually going up, whereas those of us who have mortgages don't have that problem. So I would be interested to know what the housing distribution is in those areas. And then I have one idea, communication is always an issue, but in terms of how people got their information, print media were, I think, the highest. And that was, I'm really glad that we are partnering with Sassy for the Outlook. In terms of the fact that the Los Gatos Weekly seems to now be covering more local information, and we have the Los Gatos, I'm wondering if maybe we can get them to put a digest from Notify Me in there along with the website as another way to reach people and try to get them to then be checking in weekly so they can get all the information the town puts out. So that was one concrete suggestion I had. And then I did have something else, and I think my brain fell out. I had a question, but anyway, I'll put it together in a note. But I think there's a lot of good stuff here, and I think, I think communication will go a long way. When I read through the economic information, there were comments in there like they hate the K-rail. Why don't we have better outdoor dining, etc. Well, that's unfolding as we speak. So it was very useful to see some of the comments to know which ones are issues that we either, it all goes to beach traffic and, that's somewhat intractable, but we can message around that. I would love to know if Catherine Summers thinks you can make that an opportunity. Yeah, go for it. But that's where, I want to spend more time looking, and I'll send some questions. Oh, I do know what my question is, because somehow at some meeting, I thought I heard a number. Do we know what is our present PCI? Because I thought we had gone above that magic threshold of 70 now, and I'm wondering if that's adding into people's satisfaction. So, Mr. Andrews, do you have that?
So, a little bit of a spoiler alert. We were going to be discussing some new information that Parks and Public Works received on the latest PCI data on the 17th. But I can tell you it is better than we thought, which means going forward, it will require less budgetary dollars to maintain and get to that 75 level. But we did fare pretty well, better than we thought in this last round of is it Streetscaper or Street
Saver? Street Saver,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so I was curious about that because I think, people used to complain about potholes and everything, and it seems like with Measure B and SB1 money, and a Herculean effort, that easy thing, not easy, an easily noticeable thing that makes people upset seems to have diminished. Okay, thank you.
All we have to do is catch Cupertino at their rating of 86. All right, Councilmember Hudes.
Just one last comment, and I think I agree with Mayor about a report focusing on the top issues. I do think the IS is a pointer to what those are. It does remind me of a conversation I had earlier today about some of training that I think some of us have been through on total quality management, and asking why 5 times to get to the root cause. And I think that with some of these, we've asked why maybe once, and to get deeper, we're going to need to understand. For instance, on the traffic, there are other sources of information about where traffic jams occur, and it does seem, even on something that sounds intractable, to apply. And I'm sure Ms. Pravetti and Mr. Andrews are well aware of some of the techniques that could be used, but that would be, I think, a good structure for getting to exactly the things that the mayor was asking for in the report, starting with those top issues, asking staff to participate in and potentially commissions to participate in 5 whys, and let's get to some root causes on some of these things. It's good. It's a great start, and so, but there are structures for getting through some of this. That's my last comment on this.
Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. A question for staff and a statement. I would reinforce the direction to do a follow-up survey in 2 years for benchmark comparisons. I'm not sure about doing it every 2 years thereafter, because that can be pretty costly, 25,000 a pop. But my question in regard to that is, for consistency purposes, would the survey be sent to the same households that was sent in this original survey? Or would we be tapping different households that we might get different responses?
I'm going to say typically not. I think they do a new random sample each time, but that's an area we can follow up on with ETC.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we've wound down on this agenda item. Thank you, everybody, staff members and council members, for all your good comments on this. And Mr. Andrews' report got much better today from yesterday, as he's had more chance to practice and dig into it. So that's part of the reason I think the report, as Ms. Chen said, the report was much better than the summary, because we're learning quickly here. So thank you for everybody for their effort on this, and more to come. So we'll close item 16 and we'll go back to item 15. Let's start, rather than having a long staff report, let's start with Councilmember Hudes and see what direction he was interested in taking this one.
Yeah, so I just wanted to understand this amendment and whether it's going to help us solve the issue with our filling our dispatcher positions, and to, should I still assume that we're having issues with dispatcher positions? What's the number of vacancies do we have? Are they all filled by temps? Are dispatchers still working without days off? We had a pretty grim assessment about 9 months ago, and it would be good, since this is an agenda item, to find out whether this is going to help to address it and where we are on dispatchers. So that's why I wanted to have that discussion.
Thank you, Council Member. We appreciate the concern for our dispatch service, which is so critical to our town. I will start, and then our HR Director, Selena Flores, will add in, and the Chief is with us as well. This is a continuation of the conversation that we had 9 months ago, where we are continuing to evaluate our service delivery and then look at career ladders. And so through our evaluation and working with the union that represents our dispatchers, we found that we could create more of a career ladder and provide opportunities for growth within the town. So this is part of retention strategy as well as a recruitment tool. So we feel very comfortable with the proposal that's before you this evening as a way of strengthening the dispatch career ladder within Los Gatos, and we're hopeful that that will not only help us retain our great staff, but also bring new ones in. And with that, I'll ask Director Flores to comment on where we are in filling vacancies. We've been very active in this area.
Hi, good evening. Yes, I want to echo what the town manager said. This is a recruiting and retention tool, so we're actually adding the senior dispatcher. So there's actually a ladder that our employees can grow into. This will open it up for career longevity with the town. And that's why we added this position. And as far as the recruiting goes, we are currently actively recruiting. I don't have the number on the vacancies, but we are continually doing oral boards and trying to bring in new talent. We've also started advertising the position on different social media, such as CalOps. This is something new that we've implemented to kind of grow our diverse work candidate pool. And so we're hoping that we'll continue to bring in good candidates that way. Possibly Chief Phil can talk about the current situation in dispatch and the vacancies.
Thank you very much. So we do have one dispatcher that's currently in training for the training environment downstairs in a dispatch center. It does only allow for two folks to be in training at a time. So we have 3 openings currently. We are supplementing with per diem staff. We'll continue to do so until we can get up to staffing. In regards to Councilmember Huta's question related to are they working endless days, we have actually been able to send 2 of our dispatchers to a training conference, a conference that they've been wanting to attend for several years now. So we're able to provide them with that support so they can not only network, but also bring back best training practices, trends, and then just an awareness of technology that's out there, which also strengthens us in a lot of ways. So we were able to send 2, and then we have another one that will also be attending a training conference in June. So that helps with our retention and just brings back so much valuable information to add into that training environment as well. We are actively recruiting with the oral boards coming up later on in this month to continue to evaluate the best candidate for those positions.
Thank you. So it sounds like we've filled 1 or 2 of the open positions since 9 months ago. Is that about correct?
We have since in the last 9 months, we did have 1 trainee get off of training, and then we have another person in training. The hiring process does take quite a bit of time from posting to going through the whole process and the full background and evaluating. So that's several months. And then the training in itself is about 4 to 5 months in process. And then they stay in kind of a shadow phase to continue to strengthen their confidence and their ability in both call taking and dispatching, since our dispatchers do both functions.
Okay, thank you. Having the update, I think, is very important and valuable. I know that this was a consent item, but I'm prepared to make a motion unless there are other questions.
Let me just open it up to the public first before we do a motion. Would any member of the public wish to address us on this item? Don't see any hands coming up. I'll close public comment and come back to Councilmember Hutis.
So I move to approve an amendment to the classification plan to create a flexibly staffed communications dispatcher job series.
Vice Mayor Risto.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, any further comment? Not seeing any. I'll call a question. Vice Mayor Risto.
Aye.
Councilmember Sayak.
Aye. I'm sorry, I said aye.
Councilmember Badami.
Aye.
I'll have to learn to read lips better. And Councilmember Hutis.
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye, so passes unanimously. And that is the end of item number 15 and the end of our agenda. So we will adjourn at this point. Thank you, council, for tonight's hard work. Good night.